Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague and the Democratic leader, Senator Schumer, for making it clear what's going to happen on the floor of the Senate this afternoon. We have a chance, an opportunity, when 100 senators come to the floor to put an end to the government shutdown this afternoon. And I want to tell you, there's nothing more important than that as far as I'm concerned. I hope that we'll rise to that occasion and rise to that challenge. During the last 2 days, what I've done is to travel across my home state of Illinois and to sit down and meet on an informal basis with federal employees who are going through this government shutdown. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been to Peoria, Pekin, Aurora, Marion, went to St. Louis, though it's clearly not in Illinois, to meet with air traffic controllers who live in my state. And I sat down and asked them, tell me the stories, tell me what's happened to you now that 34 days you haven't been paid, 34 days as of today. And they were a little embarrassed and a little reluctant to talk about what it meant, but eventually I said, well, then tell me about some of your coworkers, which is usually a way that people can tell their own stories without embarrassment. And I heard some stories, Mr. President, that are breaking my heart as I stand here at this moment. Have you ever been in an air traffic control tower? It's amazing. And I've seen some of the biggest. We have one up in northern Illinois that takes care of O'Hare and Midway and all of our great airports. It's a little bit frightening to go into one of these towers and see 10, 20, 30 air traffic controllers looking at these screens. And on these screens are these little dots, and each one of these dots is an airplane. And each one of these airplanes, you're going to have 20, 30, 40, 150, 200 people. And that air traffic controller has an awesome responsibility to make sure they're on the right path for takeoff and landing, to make sure that their paths don't cross. A mistake in that job can be fatal. That's the reality of what they face. So air traffic controllers have one of the most stressful jobs in the federal government. We don't think about it. We get on the plane, we get off the plane. But thank goodness for those men and women who are there to make sure that it's a safe experience for all of us. Did you know the shifts that are worked by air traffic controllers? 10-hour shifts. How would you like to face a 10-hour shift with that kind of stress every single day that you go to work? And you know how many days a week they work? 6. 6 out of 7 days, they're working 10-hour shifts in one of the most stressful jobs that we have in America. And you wonder, well, why do they work 6 days? Don't most people work 5 days, and they certainly don't work 10-hour shifts? Well, because there's a shortage of air traffic controllers. At age 56, you have to leave. Literally, you have to leave as of the next day. You cannot continue to work because they've decided at age 57, you're too old to do this job. It's too stressful. So as these air traffic controllers are leaving, we are hoping in a system that works, they are being replaced by new air traffic controllers who are being skilled and trained so they can take over these important life and death jobs. Do you know what happened because of the government shutdown? We stopped the input of new air traffic controllers. So the number is continuing to diminish because of mandatory retirement, and the pressure on these air traffic controllers increases. Increases not just because of fewer numbers, but increases because of what we've done to their lives. These men and women are totally innocent when it comes to our debate about border security. They had absolutely nothing to do with the president's promise of a grand and glorious wall from sea to shining sea paid for by the Mexicans. They didn't make that up. The president did. And now he's called for a government shutdown until his campaign promise is fulfilled. Well, I talked to some of those air traffic controllers. What's it like? What are you facing? And they went through a long litany of things that they are facing. Many of them are struggling because of no paycheck coming in. Difficult for them. A couple of them were embarrassed to say they're going to food pantries set up by churches and charities in their hometown to pick up some groceries, to feed their families during this government shutdown. Others talked to me about children and their families with serious medical problems. Yes, they continue to get their health insurance as federal employees, but the co-pays that they have to pay out of pocket, they worry about making those payments now that they're not getting a regular paycheck, and they can't see any end in sight when they will. Then a couple of them really have some very practical issues. One of them came to one of his co-workers, who's the head of the local union for those air traffic controllers, and he said, "I want to tell you something in confidence. I have 5 days left here. I cannot continue to come to work beyond 5 days. I drive long distances. I have to buy gasoline for my car. I've got to find another job. I may have to drive an Uber car, which some federal employees are doing. I may have to find some job tending bar, which some federal employees are doing, just so there's income coming in for my family." But the worst one was in St. Louis, where this woman, air traffic controller, said, "One of my colleagues here in air traffic control confided in me that he has to drive long distances to get to work in St. Louis, buy a lot of gasoline each day to make that round trip. To buy gasoline last week, he went and sold plasma from his own body to get the cash to buy the gas." That is the reality of this government shutdown. And I asked, and all of us asked, to these air traffic controllers, do you see any evidence on the job that people aren't doing the job as they're supposed to? No. We have an awesome life or death responsibility here, and we take it seriously. But they quickly added, "Senator, if this continues and people are not replaced, we're going to reach a point where we have to keep the system safe. And to keep it safe, the distances between aircraft flying into airports and out of airport will have to be increased. The intervals between aircraft will have to be increased so that there's a safe atmosphere always when it comes to our airports. What happens when that interval and distance is increased? Your flight's late again. Mine was late leaving O'Hare last night, about an hour and a half. We asked why. Well, a member of the crew was coming in on an international flight. She had to go through customs. Customs has been reduced in number to 2 people at St. Louis because of the government shutdown. So it took her an extra hour to join up with the flight that I was on. It was a minor inconvenience for me, maybe a major inconvenience for some other passenger, but it's an indication what happens when all of these men and women who are behind the scenes keeping our air control system working are under pressure, and where there are fewer of them than there should be doing their job. It reflects what happens when we don't have enough people in the customs section at international airports to process people in a timely way. The system slows down. Why? Why are we at this point? Did the air traffic controllers need to be punished for something? If they did, I don't know what it might be. They're good men and women. They are trained in a fashion that very few people could actually do their job. It's interesting. I've been down to Oklahoma City in places where they're trained. Everybody doesn't cut it. You have to be pretty darn sharp to be able to keep track of all those aircraft and to not buckle under pressure because it is a pressure-filled job. President Trump's shutdown has added pressure to that job. Does it make you feel safer when you get on an airplane to know that? I don't. I worry about it. And I worry about those men and women who simply want to do what they were hired to do. Incidentally, about a third of them are veterans. They served our country, many of them in the Air Force, and they took their skills that they learned in the military and brought them in to air traffic control. We give a lot of speeches on the floors here, Republicans and Democrats, about how we want to honor our veterans. How can we be honoring our veterans when 800,000 federal employees have gone without pay for 34 days, and between 25 and 35% of them, depending on the agency, are actual veterans? Are we honoring our veterans by not paying them in a timely fashion? The first bill that will be up today is President Trump's bill in dealing with this crisis. It will deal with the shutdown that he created, but it also addresses several other problems which the president made a decision on, and we are trying to fix. I want to address one of them in particular because it's an issue that I've worked on for a long time, and that is the fate of people known as dreamers, those who are protected by DACA. These are people who were brought to the United States as children, some of them as infants and babies. They grew up in this country believing this was home. They went to school here, they prepared for a future life, and at some point, usually in their teenage years, their parents brought them in and said, "We never filed the papers for you. You are undocumented in America." So through no fault of their own, they came to this country, brought to this country, grew up here, and they learned sometime in high school, there's no future for you in America. I've met so many of them over the years, these dreamers. I appealed to President Obama, do something to help them, and he did. He created the DACA program, and the DACA program allows these young people I've just described to go in and to apply for protection for 2 years at a time, protection from being deported from America and being allowed to work legally in America. Almost 800,000 came forward across the nation and signed up for this protection under President Obama. These are amazing young people. They are tomorrow's doctors and engineers and lawyers and teachers and leaders. They're incredible young people. I've met so many of them. All they're asking for is a chance to be part of America's future. President Trump came in September of 2017 and announced that he was abolishing this program, abolishing the DACA program, which meant that these young people had no protection for the future and really didn't know which way to turn. President Trump challenged us to come up with legislation to solve the problem he created. We were unable to do so. We couldn't reach an agreement. The president's bill, his own solution for the problem, came before the United States Senate and received 39 votes. It didn't even receive the support of his own political party when he brought it up. It just wasn't a reasonable approach. And so the president said last weekend, I'm going to address the fate of DACA and Dreamers as part of this effort to end the stalemate in Washington. My hopes were raised. He talked about a bill that I'd introduced with Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican of South Carolina, 2 years ago, called the Bridge Act, and said, that's what we're going to do. Well, it sounded hopeful. Maybe this would be part of the solution. And for these young people, it meant everything, that they might have a chance to be able to stay in this country and not be deported. Turns out when the president produced his bill a couple days ago and we read the text, it was a bitter disappointment. It really would bear no resemblance to the Bridge Act, which he referred to. I would just say to my colleagues in the Senate who are considering voting for the president's bill, please don't vote for it if you think you're doing something to help DACA and the Dreamers. This bill, as written by the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen and Mr. Miller, who is the president's advisor in the White House, shows their barely masked contempt for these young people. They have dramatically increased the cost of going through this process, doubled it. They have set in new conditions so that they can eliminate more and more people from being eligible for this protection. They've added provisions here totally unnecessary. During the 7 years when DACA has been in place, we have seen positive things happen, not negative things. And unfortunately, what the president proposes now is a dramatic step backwards. So this does not help. Well, after meeting with the air traffic controllers and federal prison guards at federal penitentiaries in Marion and Pekin, I can tell you what they want. They want the shutdown to end today. They want to get a paycheck for their families so that they can get back in the business of being good husbands, good fathers, good members of their community. They're embarrassed going to these food pantries. They can't imagine what they're going to do because of some of the problems that have been created with their credit ratings because this president has shut down their paychecks for 34 days. They don't have any choice but to come to work, these prison guards, air traffic controllers. They're called essential personnel. And so I would hope at the end of this day that we would think of them first, make sure this shutdown ends immediately today. And one other thing, this needs to be the last time we have this conversation on the floor of the Senate, the last. We've got to make government shutdowns an unacceptable tactic of either political party or any branch of our government. It is just absolutely terrible that these innocent people who work for our government are paying the price of our inability to reach a political agreement on issues. We can find an agreement on border security. but it shouldn't be because 800,000 innocent federal employees haven't received a paycheck for 34 days. Let's step forward and do this in a bipartisan fashion. Over this last weekend, I've received scores of phone calls from my colleagues in the Senate. Some people may find it hard to believe, but Republicans have called, and I've called them, and Democrats have called. It's a bipartisan feeling that this crisis, this manufactured crisis, has to come to an end. The second vote that'll be offered today, the one that the Democrats will offer, is simply to extend the continuing resolution to fund our government in the shutdown immediately and give us a matter of days to get this job done in coming to a compromise on border security. I know we can do it. I'm convinced we can do it. I know there's a feeling of goodwill, but we need enough Republicans to join with the Democrats to make this a bipartisan effort today. I don't believe the president's bill is going to pass. There are aspects to it that I've described that are just unacceptable to so many of us. But this bare bones approach, 3-week extension, a number of days to give us to actually bargain and compromise while the government is up and running and people are being paid, is a reasonable end to this. I don't know how any of us can go home if at the end of the day we've done nothing and the shutdown continues. Let us stick here and do our job, the job we were elected to do, to solve problems, not to create them. As Senator Schumer said earlier, there are so many individuals who are providing security and safety across our nation, whether it's our FBI, whether it's our prison guards, whether it's the Coast Guard, whether it's the air traffic controllers. Why in the world would we endanger any Americans because of our inability to reach a political agreement? The votes today will give us a chance to emerge from this with a positive approach to solving this problem. I believe we can do it, and the sooner the better. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.